Hello and welcome to Heroes 101, the Nexus Raiders podcast for competitive strategies and in-depth analysis for Heroes of the Storm. I'm Commander Chu, Commander Chu, and joined here with me today is Hyro Spliffix.
Hi everyone, I'm Hyro, Nick Barnhart, community member here at the Nexus Raiders, and we're here to talk about one of my all-time favorite heroes, Kael'Thas.
Yeah, but before we do that, just want to give a quick shout out to our top patrons, which are Bradley Falk, Eric Talent Jr., Nick Barnhart here, Michael Amelia, myself, and Sean Gallagher. And the rest of our patrons for making this coaching series possible. You're all the absolute best, and just be sure to check patreon.com/Nexus Raiders for the full video of this session because you guys all get it for free because y'all are patrons. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into it. Barnhart's going to be taking the lead on this Heroes 101 session. So, what about KT?
Kael'Thas. What an iconic Blizzard character in general. I remember when he was released with the Frozen Throne expansion for Warcraft 3. He is the senior member of the Kirin Tor, Prince of the Kael'Thas, last of the Sunstrider dynasty for those WoW heads out there. Just a little shout out. Lore-wise, I got a soft spot for Kael'Thas myself. But as a hero in the Nexus, love Kael'Thas. He was the blood mage in Warcraft Frozen Throne, and he is a mage out for blood in the Nexus. And I love to play him. A lot of strengths. Very impactful hero, can make or break a team for sure. And looking forward to breaking him down today.
Sweet. All right, well, why don't we go over his trait, how that works, and then we can talk about his abilities, talents, and heroic options. Then we'll get into more in-depth type of stuff after that.
Yeah, well, you can't talk about Kael'Thas, obviously, without talking about his trait or his passive. Now, for most people, that's obviously the hotkey. So important to know that essentially, rather than have like a passive ability or an upgrade like a lot of heroes have, Kael'Thas has the ability to activate what's called Verdant Spheres. That'll be his trait. And what Verdant Spheres does essentially is it magnifies the next one of his basic abilities that you cast. And Verdant Spheres has its own cooldown, and so you can imagine the whole new set of strategy and depth to a hero that already has an impactful kit, even without his trait in general. And so just jumping into a brief overview of the kit, Flame Strike is his Q. It's a castable ranged AoE, like fire blast, so to speak, after a slight delay. And it's important to know the enemy can see it before it explodes. So them to know they can obviously dodge it if they're waiting for it. Now, and his W is a pretty interesting move, Chain Bomb or Living Bomb. I'm bringing them up right now.
We call it Chain Bomb because we played Kael'Thas back in the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's actually called Living Bomb, right? And so what it does is it's a targetable spell. You cast it on an enemy, but important to note also that Living Bomb has a lower range than, for instance, his Flame Strike. So, oftentimes you'll want to throw that on like heroes, or on tanks, so to speak. Obviously, you put it on heroes or creeps if you're clearing minion waves. So the bomb ticks for 3 seconds, and then each tick it does damage, and then finally it blows up. And if there's enemy heroes nearby, the bomb actually spreads to them, and that's a pretty unique ability. And if you have a team that's heavy with crowd control, you can get a lot of utility out of that. So his last move, other than heroics, obviously, is called Gravity Lapse. It's a skill shot that obviously goes in a line, and it will stun the first enemy hero or even minion that it hits, lift them up in the air. And Kael'Thas doesn't have mobility because of this. As a mage, you'll either have hard CC like that, or you'll have a mobility. And so that's essentially his kit. And as a Kael'Thas player, you're doing a combination of throwing out living bombs on targets in range and trying to land some big flame strikes on the opposing team. So that said, oftentimes people build KT pretty straightforward. They go with the straight Q build, and now that comes with a little bit of danger at the talent tier 1. Convection is the most commonly picked talent, and that is a quest for hitting enemy heroes with your Flame Strike. You have to hit 20, And for each enemy hero you hit with Flame Strike, it increases the damage. And then at 20 shots, just to make sure I have the exact number here, at 20 shots, you get an increase of 100 damage on top of the 5 damage per people hit up to that point, right? So there's 100 damage leading up to that, and then you get an additional 100 damage. So it's an increase of 200 damage. And the thing to note on Convection, unlike a lot of quest talents for mini heroes, is if you die, you lose your stacks. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you'll see Kael'Thas is playing with a team that either has a lot of people that can protect him, or if he doesn't, you'll find that you may have a nice 5-on-5, but your Kael'Thas is playing incredibly passively, and he may not have as big of an impact early because he's trying to get those convection stacks. Something to note also, I don't really go Fel Infusion, which is his second talent. I don't think it's that powerful. It gives you a brief spell power bonus on your next ability when you activate your trait, and it gives you a bit of a heal. Now, maybe if you're doing quick match and there's no healer and you think you can get some value out of that, go for it. But more often than not, you'll run Convection. And if you're running into an enemy team that has like a Tracer, Illidan, just blow up your Kael'Thas. No matter how much your team tries, they're gonna get you as Kael'Thas. I like to run Mana Addict. It's just a regen globe gathering quest talent. And once you get 20 globes, you get to activate what's called Arcane Barrier and gain a shield equal to 100% of your maximum mana for 4 seconds. Important to note that grabbing each globe up to that point is increasing your maximum mana pool. So by the time you get it, and as you continue to play the game and gather globes, your mana pool is getting larger and larger, and that shield is becoming more, obviously stronger. Jumping into the next talent tree real quick, we're just going to go through all these. Hotslog seems to think that it's about split 49-49 between Netherwind, which increases Gravity Lapse's range, and it restores mana if it hits an enemy hero, and it refunds 80 mana. And the ability itself costs 90, so that's essentially a full mana rebuild. Restoration. You get all your mana refunded if you land a Netherwind on an enemy hero, which is nice. The other talent that's taken at 4 is Mana Tap, and that restores some of your mana whenever you activate Verdant Spears. I think that this is obviously, now we're getting to personal preference and just what I have found. To me, it's a toss-up between Netherwind or the third remaining talent at this tier, which is Energy Royal, and an Energy Royal makes it to where whenever Gravity Lapse hits a hero, you reduce the cooldown by 9 seconds. Now, that's a big deal, especially if, like I mentioned, you were going up against an enemy composition where there's a lot of frontline targets. Like, let's say they have ETC Muradin, Arthas, Sonya. They have people that are going to be in your face. The ability itself, the cooldown is 14 seconds. So if you land your Gravity Lapse on an enemy hero with a 9-second reduction, that means every 5 seconds you have a pretty nice stun, and that can help you survive a lot, especially if, let's say, you're playing quick match or you're playing Hero League, you're not in comms with your team, you're not able to communicate, hey, they're on me, and you need to be able to kind of survive on your own. I do not think that you are hindering yourself if you take Energy Royal at 4. That said, I almost every game take Netherwind. The increased range, 30% increased range, is nuts. And the mana, getting mana back, because I'm often trying to stack Convection. I'm not collecting globes, and I'm not taking Mana Tap, obviously. So I like getting that mana back, because 90 mana is a lot. So something to keep in mind.
Especially for a hero that's like primarily spell-based damage, who burns through mana very quickly.
No, if you're auto attacking as Kael'Thas, you're really probably not playing him correctly. I can't think of many times that I'm auto attacking anyone as Kael'Thas. That said, you're going to jump right into level 7. I am going to jump right into level 7 talents. This is pretty much another toss-up between 2. Most people, they're stacking Convection. They're going for the Q build. And when they do that, they take Burned Flesh at level 7. Now, that makes it to where when you hit 2 or more heroes, they take an additional damage equal to 8% of their maximum health. And so oftentimes, if they're running double bruiser, or if they have like a bruiser and a thrall, like there will be 2 targets in the front line that you can basically hit almost on every Q. And that's really important. It kind of gives Kael'Thas a lot of spell damage heroes are lacking when it comes to high health pool. And as far as I know, that might be the only spell, a magic damage spell in the game for a caster that actually increases its damage like a giant killer, like a so he's
like
unique in that regard.
Based type.
Yeah, exactly, like an HP pool based damage modifier. You know what? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that it's the only spell, mage spell that does that. So that's pretty cool. That said, I also on occasion take the other talent at this tier that I think is worth mentioning, and that's Sun King's Fury, and that increases the damage that Living Bomb does when it spreads to enemy heroes by 35%. So that's a sizable chunk of damage increase. Mm-hmm. And usually what I'm doing is I like to synergize that with when I go Mana Addict at level 1. If I don't think I'm going to stack my Qs to 20 and I don't want to play passively, my team needs me. And because oftentimes that means that, like I said, they have a very strong, very divey front line. So you're going to be getting a lot of Living Bombs off. I almost exclusively trait my Living Bomb. And just for the rest of the video, if I say trait anything, I'm just talking about press my Verdant Spheres. And that's the ability that I'm going to trait for that fight or that scenario. So I'm almost always trading my Living Bomb in those fights. And you get, I think, a lot of value out of Sun King's Fury. And Burn Flesh, like I said, can be good. But usually you're gonna take that with the rest of the Q build. Mm-hmm. Jumping right into heroics, Kael'Thas has 2, obviously, like everyone. Phoenix comes in to me as the better of the 2 heroics. He launches the Phoenix into an area, dealing 78 damage to enemies along the way. The Phoenix persists for 7 seconds, attacking enemies for 78 damage on attack, and the attack speed's pretty high. And each of those attacks splash for 50% of their damage. And to my experience, I could be wrong on this, but it prioritizes heroes. And that said, the other heroic ability that Kael'Thas can run is Pyroblast. You cast for 1.5 seconds, and then you cast a slow-moving fireball that deals a huge chunk of damage. At level 10, it's 810 damage to enemy hero and 405 damage to enemies nearby. The only reason I don't often run Pyroblast is I feel like there's a lot of counterplay ability, even if it is quick match, even if it is Hero League and they're not in comms, pretty much everybody in the game knows, okay, there's a Pyroblast on the map. What can we do to help this guy? Mm-hmm. And obviously there are times where you can cast it and there's nothing they can do. And you get the kill and you're like, that's awesome. But I feel like I really like taking Phoenix for zone control, AoE. And we'll get into some of that strategy in a little bit. But just as a note, I like running Phoenix. At 13, he has 3 different talents that modify Living Bomb. The number 1 pick, obviously, is Pyromaniac, which each time Living Bomb deals periodic damage, and this includes minions, Kael'Thas' basic abilities are reduced by 1 second. And so like I said, we know that Living Bomb ticks 3 times. So that's 3 seconds cooldown reduction on all your spells. Pretty nice. Mm-hmm. Pretty nice. And if you've got Energy Royal, that means like by the time your Living Bomb's done, you have another gravity lapse off cooldown, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, something to note too is that it's per Living Bomb that you have. So if you use your Verdant trait to get a free Living Bomb off of a hero, or just anyway off of a unit, and then you throw out your regular Living Bomb on something else, it reduces the cooldown twice as fast.
Absolutely, you're getting 2 second cooldown reduction every tick. Mm-hmm. Of that, and that means that you'll be having your Qs off cooldown. Yeah. So, and that to me is why Pyromaniac is the most picked talent at that tier. Myself, and this is a personal preference. According to HOTS logs, this isn't taken very often, much like Energy Royal. But I enjoy taking Backdraft. I think that obviously if my team has like an Arthas and a lot of CC there, or like Thrall with an Earthquake, or if my team has a lot of CC built in, not a big deal. Obviously I'm going to go Pyromaniac and just maximize getting as many Flame Strikes as possible in every fight. Mm-hmm. However, I really like Backdraft because when Living Bomb explodes, it slows enemy movement speed by 30% for 2 seconds. And it actually is a lot of movement speed reduction, and it's very noticeable in a fight. And so that's just something to throw in. Like some people like to go Fission Bomb, explodes, which increases the radius that it will spread when it finally blows up, increases the area, and that's also a great talent at the tier. There's really no, in my opinion, bad talents at 13. very situational. But I would say that the most common choice is Pyromaniac cooldown reduction. Level 16. This is a talent tier that is pretty one-sided, I would say. Fury of the Sunwell at level 16 gives you the ability, well, actually, whenever you cast Flame Strike, after a short delay, another Flame Strike is cast. And that's why it's chosen 86% of the time. So there's a reason people do that. It essentially doubles your damage. And especially if you're synergizing with some hard CC in your team, ETC Mosh Pit, even a Leo Ricken Tomb, or anytime you know that someone's going to have to contest or be in an area, you can throw out a Flame Strike and know you're going to get 2 of them. Now, obviously, that synergizes well with Convection, but even if you haven't spec'd at all for increased Q damage, by this time, level 16, Kael'Thas just naturally scales, and he's got a ton of spell ability, power, and damage. And Fury of the Sunwell is just outstanding. Now, some people go Twin Spheres. Like, that's, for me, that's if you're going heavy into your Living Bomb build, and that means that Verdant Spheres actually gains a second charge. That's what it means to me, anyways. Like, if I'm going Q build, it's usually going to be with cooldown reduction and Fury of the Sunwell. So I'll essentially be able to cast multiple Flame Strikes in a fight anyways. So if I'm going Twin Spheres, that's because I'd like to put Living Bombs on 2 or 3 targets and then just watch the chaos ensue, so to speak. I don't know how many people take Arcane Dynamo. You use it and your basic abilities increase your spell power. It's kind of a passive. It's not something you use, but when you do use a basic ability, Kael'Thas' spell power is increased by 3% per 5 seconds, stacking up to 15%. Now, that's not that great.
I don't know anyone who really takes that talent because the 2 main playstyles of Kael'Thas is either Flame Strike or Living Bomb. So the Flame Strike build, it's obvious, like you go for the double strike. If you're going for the Living Bomb build, it makes a lot of sense to get double spheres. And of course, it's very situational, depends on the map and the objective, how you want to play it. But basically, the twin spheres build allows you to put multiple Living Bombs out onto the enemy team, get that spread AoE damage, and reduce all of your cooldowns very quickly.
Right. And especially at high levels of play, my experience has been with teams like when somebody has Living Bomb on them, my whole team's communicating, hey, he's got the bomb, get away from the bomb player. You are forcing, even if you don't spread it to anybody, for that 3 seconds, you're forcing the enemy team to move differently than what they would be doing otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. They're probably trying to engage, they want to do this or that. And so they're essentially all are in comms now going, okay, everyone spread out, like get away from the bomb. And it's kind of cool to be able to do that. And sometimes maybe they don't care and you get a lot of spread and your damage is insane. So the last talent here, I know we're chugging through these pretty quick, but I really want to get into kind of the dynamics of Kael'Thas in general. But the last talent here, you have Rebirth, which affects your Phoenix. It allows you to just kind of recast it once it's on the field and change its placement, and it kind of adds to the duration. Or you can increase your Power Blast radius and lower its cooldown per enemy hero hit. However, that being said, very rarely are those talents taken. These level 20 talents are a toss-up between either Master of Flames, which means that Living Bomb will spread indefinitely. Now, this used to be, if I'm not mistaken, baseline. Calvin, is that accurate?
Yeah, back before his rework, it would just continually spread.
Right, and I think that was because they didn't have the level 13 modifiers to Living Bomb. So that's why I think that they removed that from baseline, because that would be pretty OP. But Living Bomb spreading indefinitely at level 20, the whole game changes, in my opinion, when you take that talent. We talked before about how enemy teams need to keep track of the bomb, but things are getting chaotic at level 20. Everyone's just engaging. It's a free-for-all. And if you're not paying attention, those Living Bombs, and to me, that's also, I think, just for fun. If you're just kind of messing around, I think that synergizes really well with Backdraft at 13. The movement speed's slow. Once they start spreading and everyone's slow, like they can't get away. That looks really nice. That said, although my personal preference is Master of Flames, just because I guess I'm an old school KT player and I miss that as a baseline modifier, a lot of people take Flamethrower, and that increases Flame Strike's range by a lot, 40%. And if it hits 2 or more heroes, the cooldown is reduced by 4 seconds. Now, its baseline is 7 seconds. So That's more than half the cooldown is reduced if you hit 2 or more heroes. At that point, you're just throwing out Qs left and right now, and then but to me, that's almost too much cooldown reduction if you've gone Pyromaniac at 13. If you've gone the cooldown reduction at with Pyromaniac, that's already gonna, in my mind, take at least 3 seconds off the cooldown, and every 4 seconds is plenty, is plenty fast that you don't necessarily, in my mind, it doesn't justify taking Flamethrower. That said, Flamethrower is taken the majority of the time. It's not a bad talent. Like I said, this tier is a toss-up between these two talents. Really, it's a preference of play style. I love going Master of Flames. I think it gets a lot of value. I think that by the time that you get level 20, most of what you're doing is team fighting, and that's where you get the most value. So, that said, Flamethrower, that 40% range increase is nice, but the Flame Strike doesn't exactly have a small range to begin with. I don't know how much you necessarily benefit. I think I'm able to cast Flame Strike from relative safety for most of the game regardless. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like, it's kind of like if you've watched my Vala video, it's kind of like the difference between the increased attack speed or increased attack range. Are you dying a lot? Is your team having a hard time keeping you alive? Is the enemy team, are you having a hard time getting to their backline? That's when I think Flamethrower is really good, and you really are able to force the enemy backline to play differently, because they know that even if they're in relative what would normally be a relative safe placement or positioning for them is actually well within your Q range, and then you will also have Fury of the Sunwell. So if it's in a tight lane or like a death bridge and you throw down a Q, so let's say you're on Dragonshire, you're on one of the death bridges or Sky Temple, you're on the bridge, and maybe you're defending, and their tanks come charging across the bridge. You throw up a Q behind the tanks, knowing the backline's coming, and meanwhile you have Living Bomb on the front line. So what you have is 2 Flame Strikes coming up. So the first Flame Strike goes up, then there's a delay, then there's another Flame Strike. So that's like 4 seconds right there that the backline can't engage in the fight. And then you've cast Living Bomb on one of the front line by then, and I think that by that point, by the time the backline's finally like, okay, it's safe to engage again, you have another Q up. So if used correctly to zone, you don't even have to land your Flame Strikes, because by level 20 and you've got your convection stacks, you'll be doing, like, I usually play squishy range DPS myself, and just one Flame Strike from a Kael'Thas is half your health bar. And that is just like, you can't just take half your health bar at level 20. You'll have, if I get a hit by a Flame Strike late in the game, my thought is instantly, okay, back off. Everybody back off. Let me get a heal. We'll re-engage later, and next time I won't get hit by that Q. So that's just kind of like...
I think that's actually a great segue into some more of a strategy-based discussion. So talking about Flamethrower, yeah, everything you said is like completely correct. I don't think it's a bad talent at all. If you're going up against like a Butcher Teriel or a heavy engaged comp, maybe you need Flamethrower to get some of that poke damage early in. And in that situation, I think it can be a really good pick, because you're basically trying to chip away at the enemy team's health, so that they rush to get to you, and when they do get to you, most of their health is already chunked down. So it kind of tilts the enemy, or tilts the team fight in that way. However, when using Flame Strike with the Flamethrower range, you have to consider the circumstances where you're going to be using it. If you are that far behind your front line, that means you're also not getting your Living Bomb damage out. That means you're not helping out with gravity lapses. So if you're positioned in that way during fights, it's highly likely that you're not actually doing the damage that your team needs you to do. Or if you position yourself a little bit farther forward so that you are like within normal range, you can then use Flamethrower to hit that back line if they are further away from, your enemy team's front line. So I would say that's probably the more correct way. Like, just because you have that range doesn't mean you have to be that far away from the enemy front line, right? You should be actively trying to utilize all of your abilities, especially if you went for cooldown reduction on your Living Bombs. You want to try to be close enough and position well enough so that you can throw out your Living Bombs, get those cooldown reductions, and toss out Flame Strikes wherever they need to go. In maps like Cursed Hollow, for example, or Warhead Junction, where the enemy team has to channel an objective for a certain amount of time, getting that increased range can help you poke effectively and stall out the enemy team from being able to channel. Of course, that'll only last you so long, and you do need the team to follow up. But that is a situation where I could possibly see someone taking flamethrower. Um, I mean, I personally don't take it because I prefer the living bomb spread because oftentimes if your team is coordinated enough, even if the enemy team is coordinated, your tanks or your frontline are usually going to be able to focus the enemy team's movement, and you're already going to be using your flame strikes to force their positioning as well. So chances are very high if you're tossing out two living bombs at once that at least one is going to spread, and as that one spreads, it spreads again and again. So
Right.
that's where I see a ton of value, and it's a great counter to heroes like Lucio and Brightwing and Ariel, heroes that require healing to be done within a small area. I mean, even like against Karazim as well, because the enemy team needs to clump up for heals. They're going to be regularly clumping up, allowing Living Bomb more chances to spread. So that's why
Right.
you often see Kael'Thas picked against Brightwing, Kael'Thas picked against Oriel, Karazim, really area-based supports.
Yeah, another addition to that, like another reason why you might pick a Kael'Thas into a Kharazim is not just because obviously, like you mentioned, certain supports require people to clump up together to get good heals, but also there are just a slew of heroes who uh, teleport to allies. That's a great time to throw a living bomb. Like to me, anytime a Kharazim comes to the front line, I throw a bomb on him because most Kharazim players are just going to poke a little bit, maybe throw a heal on the tanks, and then dash to the back line. I'm trying to think of some other examples. Muradin always jumps away. Muradin's another great one to throw living bombs on because usually Muradins will be very aggro and then they'll take some damage and then want to jump out so they can heal with their passive. They're almost always going to be jumping into the back line. There's just many heroes that play like that, and I'm sure if you're listening or watching, like you got some examples coming to mind. So just there's a lot of frontline or even just melee assassins who are just as a Kael'Thas player, you'll just play a lot and then you'll just know like, hey, there's a Nubarak in my face, but my team's coming in, and yeah, he just impaled me, but I think he's about to burrow, throw a living bomb on, and sure enough, that Anubarak is going to burrow back into his team and spread the bomb. And you can kind of use the enemy's movement to your advantage, I think, with living bomb. You don't have you can get living bomb on the back line without actually having to do it. You're making the enemy front line do it for you. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, Kael'Thas is an especially great pick against double warrior comps, like especially comps that have a main tank and a bruiser. Um, One, because the main tank is just going to be hanging out in the front line, and the bruiser is almost usually a melee hero that has to be in the front line as well. Because bruisers typically have a lower health pool, they'll be retreating at a higher frequency than the tanks, opening up more possibility and chances for the living bomb to spread. That being said, Kael'Thas also works really well within double warrior comps, just because the nature of Kael'Thas of being really immobile and vulnerable, you usually want more than one warrior protecting and zoning for that Kael'Thas. And something important to note is that when you do have a hero that is like Kael'Thas that has high burst and high sustain damage, sustain being through Living Bomb, you don't really need too much more damage within your team fight. So most of your energies are going to be working on zoning and protecting the Kael'Thas to make sure that your damage doesn't die. Your own team's bruiser doesn't necessarily need to worry about doing too much damage against the enemy team, and more so just needs to focus on surviving. Because when you're playing with the
Yeah,
Kael'Thas on your team, there's going to be a ton of damage coming out if your Kael'Thas knows what he's doing.
yeah, that is great. That is a great point. There's a lot of range damage out there that's very mobile. Your Valas, your Li Mings, and they're going to be kind of just like dashing around. Your Tychuses trying to get their damage where they can get it. But really, like when you have a Kael'Thas, it's almost like you want your whole team to just like get around you in a circle and just move slowly in a ball and like and if they try to engage on you, you got your gravity laps ready and your tanks are ready to peel, and you're able to essentially just throw out damage. And I mentioned this before, but Q already has such an awesome range, and if you do trade your Q, which I don't often, if you do trade your Q, then you get that much more extended range when you cast Flame Strike, and it can catch people off guard. Even before 20, obviously, because maybe they're expecting a flamethrower pick at 20, but you can get a nice little extension to the Q range when you use your trait and buff Flame Strike.
Yeah, so since we're
So
talking
yeah,
about the trait, let's actually jump in and mention how his trait works with Living Bomb for a moment. I know I'm talking about Living Bomb a lot. It's because that's my main build. I know you're a Flame Strike kind of build, KT. I'm the Super Troll Living Bomb build, KT.
Well, I mentioned, hey man, I take Master of Flames. I do. Even when I'm going Q build, I take Master of Flames.
Yeah, something that's important to note with KT is there are very efficient ways to use him, especially concerning your mana and your damage output. For example, I don't know if you do this, Barnhart, but when I'm playing Kael'Thas, I'll use my trait to augment my Living Bomb, toss out a free Living Bomb, because when you do use your trait on it, it allows you to throw out a manaless Living Bomb and have an instant reset. So you're essentially getting two Living Bombs, right? And I'll use both of those and then a Flame Strike to get my damage out and just wait for the cooldowns. Obviously there are multiple
Yeah, you're
ways to
talking
play
about
that.
like burning down a boss. You're
Yeah,
talking about like when
exactly.
you're burning down. That's a good thing to remember. And it used to be that Kael'Thas's trait used to actually make your Q damage increase. That's no longer the case. So you actually get no value if you're burning down a static target or even a frontline tank, for instance, that you know is not going to do a lot of moving. You get no value out of trading your Q at that point. So if your team's burning down a boss and you know it's going to take a while, yes, always trade your Living Bomb, throw out your Q, and then your Verdant Sphere's cooldown is actually shorter than the Living Bomb cooldown. So it's important to know, like, if it's a camp, like let's say it's Bruiser camp, and you want to just do your usual, you trait your Living Bomb, you cast it on the Mage caster, then you throw down your Flame Strike. It might have value then, if the camp's not going to last very long, to use your second Living Bomb and put it on cooldown. But if it's an extended boss duration, your DPS, your damage per second, is actually at its highest when you trait your Living Bomb, throw out a Q, and then wait till your Verdant Spheres comes off cooldown, trade it again, and then you just essentially only use your so the longer the fight, the more value you get out of that, because you've essentially taken 5 seconds off your Living Bomb cooldown for that whole fight. Just something to think about.
Right. All right. Well, we are at the halfway point of this episode, so if you're watching live, we're gonna continue in just a moment. But for those of you who are watching on YouTube or on Facebook, if you want access to the full hour session, just head over to patreon.com/Nexus Raiders. All of our patrons, regardless of pledge tier, get access to these Heroes 101 sessions, so be sure to become a patron if you aren't one already.